So I think Manchester United have got huge scope to spend because qualifying for the Champions League is worth, I would say, a minimum of £30 million in prize money. Then you've got another £30 million from ticket sales from the group stages of Champions League matches. You've got another £10 million coming from Adidas because they're back in the Champions League, and there will also be step ups from Snapdragon and so on. So the minimum they're going to pick up is.
Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. My name is Joe, and today we are joined once again by friend of the channel and host of the Price of Football podcast, Kieran Maguire, football finance expert. Kieran, good to have you back on. How are you?
I'm good. I'm just missing football. Not having any matches for 3 weeks is doing my head in.
I know, it's been too long, hasn't it? It's been way too long, especially for us teams out of the FA Cup. There's not been much to latch onto for, it seems absolutely ages now. There's a lot I want to talk about today, and it's a kind of a wrap-up of a few things. So I want to have a little bit of a look at Man United's potential spending power in the summer. I know it's something that maybe we can't put a sort of pounds and pence on, but just an idea of where United's financials are and how that could look going into the summer. I also want to have a bit of a look at some of our rivals. Chelsea reporting some of the biggest losses in football history, and yet, depending on which Twitter thread you read from whichever fan, they can go again in the summer. They're not falling foul of PSR, and you think, this is an absurd position that we find ourselves in. And of course, we can't go a full video without talking about Man City's charges and where we're up to with those and predictions and all that sort of fun stuff. So let's start with Manchester United then. We saw recently that Manchester United had reported some profit for the first time in a little while, but the debt was still up over £1 billion, the highest I believe that it's ever been, or certainly in that ballpark. Just in terms of that baseline to start with, how healthy are United's finances as far as you're aware?
That they can pay the bills. I think that's the first and most important thing. I know Jim Ratcliffe had that scare story out a couple of years ago that the club would have gone bust had it not been for the job losses. So they're generating a lot of cash. They generate more cash than any other club after sort of subtracting the day-to-day running costs of Manchester United. So that's still a huge positive in terms of the way that the club's run. They have bought a lot of players in recent years, and I think the issue that people have picked up upon is that they've bought those players, but they've bought them on credit, and that's meant that the amount of money that they owe to other clubs has been going up and up and up. So I think they owe gross £460 million in unpaid transfer fees. So that's a bit of an anchor, but should they qualify for the Champions League, and I guess Manchester United fans would have been cheering on the Arsenal victory earlier this week, because that now guarantees 5 English clubs in the Champions League next season. So finish in the top 5, and I think they're again in a strong position come the summer. Casemiro's off the wage bill. One or two other players who are currently out on loan, they might be off the wage bill because if other clubs pick up the options to sign them. So you look at that, and potentially we could be saving £50 million a year in wages from 3 or 4 players. So that's a positive, and being in the Champions League is worth a huge amount of money, even compared to sort of 3 years ago. The expanded Swiss model format, the additional fixtures at home, and with the prices that are being charged at Old Trafford these days, the club can make £7-8 million from a home match in Europe. So all of these, I think, are huge positives. So yes, there's a lot of debt, but the debt is manageable. The only slight sort of speck of problem on the horizon is that quite a lot of the debt is due to be repaid in 2027. That's when the loans expire, or some of the loans expire. But again, I don't see that as being a problem because the banks are happy lending to Manchester United. Manchester United is happily borrowing from the banks. So I anticipate that the bank manager will call up the board of directors and say, do you want to extend it for another 5 years? And the Glazers and Ratcliffe and Ineos and everybody else will say yes. And then it's just a case of haggling over the interest rate. And I think that could be a slight negative. I suspect interest rates will be higher than the current level, but not not absurdly so.
Just on the interest thing, are Man United ever paying off these debts, or are we just paying the interest? Like over the last few years, what's your understanding of that? Is it just a keep ticking things over and then the debt stays the same?
Well, there was some of the capital repaid when Manchester United listed on the New York Stock Exchange. But then what they've tended to do is that they've got the loans and now they've got an overdraft facility. And what they tend to do is to the overdraft facility is a more flexible way of borrowing, but they have been absorbing more and more of the overdraft and also extending the ceiling of the overdraft. Now, again, I'd actually take that as a positive in the sense that banks wouldn't be willing to lend and wouldn't be willing to increase the overdraft limit unless they were very confident that the club had the cash to pay it down as and when necessary. So yes, the debt has gone up. There's been a couple of occasions when it's gone down, but it's tended to creep up. It is expensive running an elite football club. There have been significant costs incurred in terms of player payoffs, manager payoffs, redundancy costs for staff, and so on. It's meant that that it's cost them a lot of money.
It's interesting, isn't it, when you look at these like big companies and you look at sort of even countries and stuff. So many of the biggest, richest, most powerful entities in the world have got millions, billions, trillions of debt. Like it feels as though being rich, successful, and powerful, and being hugely in debt almost go hand in hand. They're certainly not two things that sort of never overlap each other. And the next question: what is a revolving or rotating credit facility? Because we hear this well that United dip into for more players in the summer. What is a rolling credit facility?
It's what they call what we call an overdraft. It's an American word for overdraft.
Okay.
So just like you might have an overdraft facility at your bank, doesn't mean that you're using it.
Right.
And it's something that you can dip into as and when needed, because if you take a look at the finances of a football club, if United have they got a home match, appreciate there's a large number of season tickets, but they'll still be collecting cash. They'll still be generating money from merchandise sales, from catering sales, and so on. So that reduces the overdraft, and then it sort of creeps up with the next payroll and so on. It'll be offset when you get the next payment from the Premier League or the next payment from Adidas and Snapdragon and other sponsors, which tend to be quite lumpy. So an overdraft makes a lot of sense if you are a football club. Again, I think it's a testament to the Manchester United brand. I know as a fan, I don't like that word. It's a testament to the Manchester United brand, is that they're one of the few football clubs where a bank would actually give them an overdraft facility. If I was a club at the wrong end of the Premier League, as a bank, I wouldn't go near them. So again, it's not nice, but it's a sign of the strength of the club in terms of how it's perceived in the financial markets.
It's weird, isn't it, that? Yeah, like you said, the stronger you are, the worse position you're allowed to put yourself in whilst it not being a bad position somehow. In terms of this being a sort of an overdraft then, how does that relate to PSR? Because for so many clubs, the words PSR or the initials PSR are the sort of be-all and end-all of what we can spend this summer. Whereas United, we seem to hear two different things. One is we're within the limits of PSR, that's fine, but United don't have the cash. How can you have these rules that some clubs, they sneeze and they've gone past the PSR limit, whereas United can be hundreds of millions in debt and have all this money that we owe, and yet it's actually the actual cash in our pocket that's the problem rather than the rules?
Yeah, as far as PSR is concerned, it's based on profit. And profit is the revenue that Manchester United generate from ticket sales, from merchandise, from commercial, from broadcast, from player sales. So it's that money less the day-to-day running costs. Now, the thing about a loan or an overdraft, it's a glorified mortgage. Now, I might have a mortgage of 300 grand. Yeah, that sounds quite scary, and I've got 3 grand in my bank account. I can still pay for the milkman. I can still go and pay for my weekly groceries because the debt itself is not due for repayment for a few years. And also, as long as I can make the monthly interest payments, and that's the key thing, it's servicing the debt that matters, not the debt itself.
That makes complete sense. So United aren't, but essentially the debt isn't factored into the PSR calculations. It's just the operating profits over the previous 3-year period or whatever it may be.
That's right. Yeah, and it's more to do with sort of the wage costs, the amortization on transfer fee costs, and so on. And that's where Manchester United are doing really well. Their wages as a proportion of revenue has dropped to 47%. That's the lowest it's been for some time. And that puts them in a strong position, first of all, in terms of UEFA, because UEFA have got a limit of 70%. And if the worst happens and Manchester United don't qualify for Europe, and I don't think any of us are expecting that to be the case, the Premier League rules from next season says that you can spend 85% of your revenue on player costs and still have no sanctions.
Wow, it's a lot, that, isn't it? It does feel like you're in a murky water once you get up to everything you earn being spent on wages or thereabouts. I know I don't expect you to put, like I said, a pounds and pence number to this, but what kind of ballpark would you envisage United being able to spend in the summer? Because it's clear that we're looking at midfielders, maybe another attacker, left backs on the horizon. Do we need any football club? There's no end of positions you'd fill if you had infinite money and space. What kind of spending power do you think United have? Because we look at all these numbers as fans and think we're not going to be able to get anyone in the summer. There's no money there.
Well, here you've got to use this finance concept of amortization. So let's say that Manchester United spend £200 million. They bring on players on 5-year contracts. You say 200 divided by 5. So the cost which goes into your PSR or SCR calculation is only 40 million. Now, appreciate you got the wages on top. If they sell Marcus Rashford for 30 million, you get 100% of that profit goes into that calculation as well. So you've got 30 million plus coming from the sale of Manchester United. If let's say he goes to Barcelona, you got 40 million on your purchases of 200 million pounds worth of play. So the net cost, as far as next year's PSR and SCR calculations are concerned, is only 10 million quid. So I think Manchester United have got huge scope to spend, because qualifying for the Champions League is worth, I would say, a minimum of 30 million pounds in prize money. Then you've got another 30 million pounds from ticket sales from the group stages of Champions League matches. You've got another 10 million pounds coming from Adidas because they're back in the Champions League, and there will also be step-ups from Snapdragon and so on. So the minimum they're going to pick up is 90 million pounds from all of those sources. Every time they win a match in the Champions League, that's 2 million euros. And if you get to the further stages, the money just gets absolutely crazy. So with that in mind, and also under the UEFA rules, you're not based on what you've spent in the football season. You're based on what's happening in the calendar year. Again, Manchester United qualify for the Champions League, and they've got all of that extra money going into the year to the 31st of December 2026. That allows them to spend. So I don't see a problem, and certainly the noises I get from Old Trafford is that the players who they signed last summer came in on wages which are far lower than those of some of the players who are perhaps exiting the club this summer. So again, that's a positive, and that gives them further leeway to spend.
That's good news. That's exactly what I wanted to hear, that there's an opportunity to spend. I mean, it's not all about spending, is it? You've got to spend wisely, because United have spent £1 billion in the last 10 years and, not really got very far with it. So there's no shortage of bad signings you can make for £1 billion. And that moves us nicely on to my next topic, which is Chelsea, who, since their new owners came in, have spent 630 million in 1 year. Then they spent 448 million. This is euros, by the way. 281 million, 339 million, and already have 63 million quid's worth of players to arrive in the summer that haven't even played for Chelsea yet. Their spending has been, well, it's unique in the world of football. This has never happened before, spending on this scale for this extent of time. There was a report, I think it was last week, that they'd recorded the greatest single season loss ever of what was it now? It's 262 million. Yeah, deficit that eclipses Man City's in 2011. like I said before, depending on what you read, who you believe, what you see on social media, some people say this is it, they have to change, they can't keep doing this, and other people say because they sell quite well, plenty more of this to come. What's the truth with all this? How can Chelsea be doing this and getting away with it, or will they get away with it?
They will to an extent. They are under sanctions from UEFA, which means I think we call it the player A list or the player one list, which is effectively first teamers. They are only allowed to have a net spend of zero. So it's not how much they buy; it's how much they buy after taking into consideration player disposals.
Okay.
And they are quite clever and cute on that. There's also, you mentioned all of the costs of the players that came in, but remember the likes of Cole Palmer and Caicedo and Cucurella and Fernandez, they all came in on 8 and 9 year contracts. So going back to that amortization issue, I said before UEFA closed the door, they were signing a player on £100 million. But if that's on an 8 year contract, that only works out as 12.5 million a year. When they sold Mason Mount to Manchester United, they generated 60 million, and because he was an academy player, that's a 60 million plus. They bought Caicedo, they bought Fernandez, and they worked out as 12.5 million each. So they were still quids in. So they've played the game very well, and yes, they've reported these huge losses. They've not published the accounts. It's doing my head in as a nerd, as you can imagine, because I like going into the small print. But as far as those losses are concerned, those are your 24-25 losses. If you go back a season, they sold the women's team to themselves for 200 million quid, and it was in the books at 1 million. So they made 199 million pounds worth of profit on and look, Chelsea's women's team really good. Nobody's denying that. They play at Kingsmeadow,
Yeah.
in front of what 4,000-5,000. So, but they said, and the Premier League caved in on that. They sold a car park to themselves and a hotel. They made 76 million pounds worth of profit. So you've got 270 million pounds worth of profit from sales to related parties, sales to themselves in 23-24, and they've got the 260 million pounds worth of loss the following season. The two figures actually net off against each other. So it's more to do with compliance with the UEFA business plan. That's going to be their main constraint. And what Chelsea are better at doing than anybody else is selling youth team players. And of course, youth team players have cost you nothing. So if you sell one for 30 million, that's another 30 million pounds into the bank. And I think this is where Manchester United are now starting to take advantage of that. If you take a look, the sales of McTominay, Greenwood, Garnacho, those sort of Manchester United are now replicating that model. But in the case of Chelsea, you've got Conor Gallagher, you've got Mason Mount, Tammy Abrahams, Figueroa Tomori, Billy Gilmore. The list goes on and on. They've got Grant Hall went to Newcastle and so on. And all of those have gone into the sort of the plus column, which has allowed them to buy players a multiple of that, and then they spread that cost over a number of years.
Is there ever a point where the chickens come home to roost, if you want that expression, of like, we get that technically, you're amortizing this player over 5 years, and therefore you can buy a player that costs 5 times less or sell a player for 5 times less, and it covers the cost of it. But at some point, the numbers just don't add up, do they? Is this something that can stretch on forever, where we're spending 5 times what we sell, but somehow it's okay because we're spreading the? Do you know what I mean? Do these things ever actually end up being a huge problem, like they feel like they should be?
Well, what happens if for a couple of years your academy's bobbins, and therefore you've got nothing to sell, and then it does start to catch up with you. And the other place it can catch up with you're far too young to remember. There was a player called Winston Bogart who was signed on a big long contract many years ago, and he lived on, I think he lived on a houseboat or something crazy, and he just sat at home because Chelsea couldn't shift him, or it was either Chelsea or West Ham. They bought a player for a large amount of money. What happens if the players are rubbish? If you look at the issue that they've got outstanding with Mudryk
I was just going to mention, that's a world of pain.
Yeah, and I was reading an article in the Athletic, I think last week. He goes along to a local park with his with his trainer, and just practices as you or I would do
Yeah.
down the park with a couple of lads. That if that happens again, or they sign somebody for 60 or 70 million, and they turn out to be not very good, and then they're on the hook for wages for 8 years. So yeah, it can catch up with you if you sign a few clunkers.
Yeah, because I mean, I think, what was it? 70, 80 million, rising up to 100 potentially for Mudryk. And he's someone that, much as we've seen with United, so I'm not getting on my high horse too much here, but it would be surprising to me if he left for anything more than £0, basically. His reputation is zero at the moment, isn't it, at Chelsea? Banned for drugs, and then the performances before that weren't great either. It's like, yeah, hopefully, well, not hopefully, but part of you thinks, I don't want football to be operated the way that it has been over the last few years, selling yourself your own assets. And in theory, could the new bit of Chelsea that owns the women's club sell it back to the old bit and make more profit again, or is that just a one-time deal? These car parks and
I think as far as Chelsea FC holdings are concerned, they could probably only do it once, and the
Okay.
Premier League has sort of reluctantly voted to tighten up the rules. But that was, Chelsea had done it, Villa have done it, Everton have done
Yeah.
it. We've just seen Sunderland sell their women's team. Although, to be fair to Sunderland, I believe they've not sold it to themselves. It's seen as a get out of jail free card historically.
Didn't Newcastle do it and then UEFA rejected it or something like that, or refused to acknowledge it or something?
I think no, Newcastle have just sold St James's Park to themselves.
That, it's just, it's horrific, really, isn't it? When you think about these institutions that are hundreds of years old, or 150 years old in some cases, and all of a sudden it's like, let's just strip it all and do everything we possibly can for a few more quid right now. I mean, speaking of, again, lovely little segue, Manchester City, who we're what, 14, 15 months post the conclusion of the trial, would you call it a trial? The whatever the word is for their 115 plus charges. I think it's more like 135, isn't it? And we're still waiting on an answer. There was a sort of a report, a flurry of kind of excitement about 10 days ago or so, that there was this new thing that there's going to be 60-point deduction. It's going to happen before the end of the season. Everyone's losing their minds. They're going to get relegated, this, that and the other. We haven't heard anything on that. What's your understanding of where we're up to with this? Do you expect to hear anything anytime soon?
It's a classic. How long is a piece of string, Joe? In the sense that when I'm on WhatsApp groups with lawyers and finance people and so on. And initially, like everybody else, we thought it would have been out. I think Pep himself hinted that it was going to come out in February or March 2025. Well, we're
Yeah.
more than a year down the line from there at present. It will come. It will be come out of the blue. To give the people involved some credit here, nobody knows what's going on. I talk to various people, and there's no sign of any white smoke. I think it's indicative that whatever the verdict is going to be, it's probably not a slam dunk for either side. Because if the evidence had been overwhelming, either for the Premier League or for Manchester City, one would presumably have had a verdict to date. The other thing, which has sort of been hinted at, and again, I've got no evidence to prove one way or the other, is that some people may have declined to give evidence. In the case of Chelsea, we saw Chelsea being given a £20 million fine 2 years ago. Well, the executives of Chelsea under Roman Abramovich, they refused to give evidence to the commission. So therefore, nobody's being held responsible for this. If we look at one of the accusations at Manchester City, was that Roberto Mancini was being paid £2 million a year for doing 4 days coaching in Abu Dhabi. Provided he sticks it on his tax return, he's perfectly entitled to go down that route. We'd do it. So I'm not criticising the individual concerned, and the stories that doing the rounds. And this could just be gossip, and the chances are it's just gossip, is that they asked Mancini to give evidence to the commission, and he says, no, I've got better things to do with my time. And they can't compel him to come. They can't compel the sponsors from Abu Dhabi to attend. So therefore, the decision has to be based on emails and documentation. There were 200,000 pieces of evidence at the Premier League Commission's hearing for Chelsea. given that the Manchester City accusations cover a 9-year period, you're probably looking at 500,000 pieces of paper that have to be reviewed, and then they've got to go, and then you've got 135 charges. Well, does that piece of paper relate to charge 64 and 72? It's a huge administrative exercise to go through, and the three people who are on the commission, it's not as if they're not doing anything else with their time. They are very highly regarded legal experts, and they're constantly in demand. So it's a bit like you trying to get 3 or 4 mates to agree where to go on a Friday night. I can't make that Friday. I'm out with the missus. I'm out with the kids, and then you work it out, and it's August. So there's an element of that. It's a slow process, and they've got to get it right because the accusations are effectively that of corporate fraud. That is a very serious accusatory issue as far as both the Premier League and City are concerned.
I know this is just a slightly childish question. Do you think they've actually read all 500,000 pieces of paper? Because if someone recommended a book to you and they're like, it's this book, it's fantastic, it's the best thing you'll ever read, it's 500,000 pages long, you might read a few bits, you'd skim, there's got to be skimming some of it, haven't they?
Probably lobbed it into ChatGPT, Joe.
Yeah, exactly. What do you think, guilty or not?
Yeah.
You've reached your upload limit for the day, 3 pages. It's going to be 60 years before we get a result. On that 60-point claim that did the rounds, you have sort of implied or suggested that a similar number would make sense to you, potentially, if City were found guilty of the things that they've been accused of. Is that still the way you see it? Has anything changed in the meantime? Have you heard anything that would maybe change your mind on what you think a potential punishment could be?
I've heard nothing. I'm not a lawyer. I listen to Stefan Borson, who does TalkSport, and he's a big City fan. He said, "Well, I don't know where you got that number from," and I just said, "Well, where I got it from on the fact that Forest and Everton got 4 to 6 points effectively for breaching the rules in one season. City are being accused of a breach over a 9-year period, so a 10-year period. So perhaps multiply it by that. City have certainly not cooperated, so that might increase the number of points deductions as well. But we could end up in a position not dissimilar to that of Chelsea, where perhaps Manchester City are found guilty of some of the charges, but when you add in the amount of money that has been saved or has not gone into your PSR calculations, that they're still short of the limit. And the reason why Chelsea didn't get a points deduction was the Premier League said, and this is where I think a load of people said, you clearly don't understand football, but the Premier League says, well, yeah, if that money had been paid legitimately to Eden Hazard's agent instead of through dodgy means, they would have still been below the limit, so therefore we're not going to give you a points deduction. Whereas everybody's saying, hold on, they signed Eden Hazard. I remember United were interested in Eden Hazard. Arsenal were interested in Eden Hazard. And anybody that saw him play, to say that Chelsea didn't get an on-pitch advantage from signing him has clearly never watched a game of football.
Yeah, and part of the reason United didn't sign him is because we didn't want to do the whole agents' fees thing. So, yeah, it's a mad situation. Unfortunately, one that we're not seemingly. I guess we are technically closer to an outcome because every day that passes is closer to something. But it doesn't feel as though it's imminent, which is infuriating at best. But it's been fantastic talking to you, Kieran, as always. Thank you for coming on, giving us a bit of optimism about United's financial position, at least, even though there's loads of debt. It's kind of debt that's maybe a little bit understood in the world of big businesses. So, yeah, thank you very much for coming on.
Cheers. Love to all at the Paddock. Keep up the great work, guys.
Thank you very much, and we'll see you in a bit.